Mega Man Legends 2 was released in April of 2000 as a very late PlayStation 1 title, being just a few months before the release of the PlayStation 2. As a follow-up to the first Legends game, it attempts to address many aspects of that game's story which had been left on a cliffhanger. We start out with a pretty grand opening on board the Sulphur Bottom airship. It turns out that the Motherlode, yes that same Motherlode from the first game that is promised to be the answer to this world's slowly dying energy crisis, has been located, with the expedition at the helm of Von Blecher, one of Barrel Casket's old friends. They make for Forbidden Island where the Motherlode is located after barely surviving their first visit 10 years previously. This whole event is televised for all to see. We also see some familiar news reporters at the same scene. We then cut to a depressed Roll who is watching the events unfold. I forgot to mention, but in the previous game, the sole reason she's a spotter for Mega Man Volnut on his expeditions as a digger is because her parents were also looking for the Motherlode but have been missing the past 10 years after getting lost on Forbidden Island. As a result of her missing parents, she has been living with her granddad Barrel. She was always under the impression that she would someday find them alongside the mysterious treasure. However, it's here where she is left out of the picture as Von Blecher takes over the legendary search, which is why she is down in the dumps. We cut back to the televised event where a mysterious woman who looks like Matilda, Barrel's daughter and Roll's mother, interrupts the event. She tells them to turn back on what you call the Motherlode is not what you think it is, and it's a catastrophe waiting to happen.
What you call the Motherlode is not what you think it might be. No, it's not a treasure at all. It's a catastrophe waiting to happen. Gats!
Stop! Hold your fire! Cease fire!
After attacking the Sulphur Bottom ship as a warning shot, Roll and Volnut decide to investigate for themselves and explore this mysterious Forbidden Island. After some on-ship shenanigans involving Data the Monkey, we are then given control for the first time. But we don't have long to think since there's a fire to put out. Depending on how well you do here, the amount of damage to the ship will vary, and a side quest similar to the City Hall side quest in the previous game will open up, where you can donate money to restore what was destroyed. The controls are way better here. We now have different degrees of movement, allowing for a brisk walk or a quick sprint. The camera control is also improved, letting you freely move with the second analog stick. This game pretty much fixes any issues I had with the previous entry when it comes to movement now that we have true dual analog stick support. Before the game opens up, we need to take a quick stop at a place called Kalinsa since the ship can't get anywhere near Forbidden Island without an upgrade to withstand the harsh winds surrounding the island. Landing on the snowy plain of Kalinsa, we are now free to explore the sights. It's very cozy in this snowy town. You have all these small shops and houses. I really love this little Mega Man video that plays at the bar, a neat touch. Similar to what I said in the Misadventures of Trombone video, I really love how the earlier games are a part of the world of Mega Man Legends. It has that nice sort of meta vibe to it all. You've got other facilities you'll revisit later on like this post office. Similar to Catalog's Highland in the first game, there is a surprising amount of interactivity to everything. There's also this church that I'll elaborate more on later. That's right, we have a religion now, and a surprisingly in-depth one at that, but I'm getting way too ahead of myself. There is also this interesting guild mechanic here. In order to increase the game's overall difficulty, you will have to pass this trial. It sounds strange, but this might be hands down my favourite way of implementing difficulty in a game. See, the more trials you pass, the higher the difficulty becomes, and there are exclusive dungeons that will be accessible from this. You get a pat upon completion, making this the only time in a game I've noticed that the harder difficulty is acknowledged by the game's world itself. I just found this approach way more charming than some lifeless hard mode that you typically see in most games' main menu. The trials are difficult, but makes the mode feel earned and prepares you for the added challenge. Good stuff overall. The dungeons are back from the first game, being a bit more linear this time around. Legends 2 in general is much more linear than the first game. I also like how Roll sometimes follows you in this game's world, a small detail but adds a lot to the atmosphere. At the end of this dungeon, in typical Mega Man fashion, we fight a boss. Boss fights this time around are way better. You are no longer stuck in place as you can aim the camera, allowing boss encounters to feel less static and much more action and reflex focused. Equipment wise, Legends 2 is very similar to the first game. You still have the choice to upgrade whichever stat you prefer, similar to a JRPG. Once again, I mainly focused on power, with the new Hypershell weapon being a personal favourite of mine. On top of the new arm cannons, you have a secondary weapon you can switch to whilst being out on the field. A bit of a random comparison, but this reminds me of the new feature that's coming to Monster Hunter Wilds. Mega Man Legends sure was ahead of its time. Moving forward, we find our much needed refractor part alongside rescuing this man who helps us build the device we need to reach Forbidden Island. After doing some shopping and preparing, we land on the harsh climate of Forbidden Island.
Are you ready, Mega Man?
Yep.
Okay, here we go. Hold hatch open. Releasing docking clamp. Drop ship away!
There are a few Reaverbot enemies, alongside some frozen victims. There's also this mysterious girl who's trapped in stasis. Carrying on, we are confronted by this Reaverbot boss as the ground shakes around us. One tanky boss fight later, and the storm which was caused by the big elephant looking guy stops. After a bright light, we activate this person called Sarah, who we don't know anything about yet, alongside meeting this other person. The two figures who warned us not to pursue them overload take the girl away we saw earlier in stasis.
Well, that's done it. They woke her up.
I'll elaborate more when the story does, but so far we are supposed to be left in confusion here, granted it is a lot to take in. Finally reunited with Barrel, the two people we found earlier are brought on board the Sulphur Bottom ship. We learn that the two are from the past and are our ancestors. We find out that in order to open the overload, we must first locate 4 keys which are found across this game's world known as Terra. It's here where the game finally opens up as we explore each dungeon to find one of the 4 keys. Skypirates catch wind of this and it's a mad dash to find them before they do, whilst confronting the Bonds and their new members. One addition to their crew is Glide from the previous game, who is kinda just there after the two sides hinted each other in the Misadventures of Tron Bonne. Some of these aspects will be more apparent later, but some of this game's writing feels kinda rushed. A lot of this game's new enemies barely have any introduction before being tossed aside. Anyway, starting off our journey at Manda Island, you might have realised, but unlike the first game taking place in one main open area, we instead have smaller sandbox style islands to explore. A good example to use here is Metroid Prime 3. Prime 1 like Legends 1 had one big interconnected area, whereas Legends 2 like Prime 3 has a world map where you explore more linear areas. Personally, I prefer this approach since it allows you to easily keep track of everything and lowers the amount of backtracking. Granted, I will admit this is a personal design preference and it will vary from person to person. Back on Manda Island and we find those lovable yet punchable surfboards. We are then confronted by Tron from the hit game The Misadventures of Tron Bonne. After fighting against her in a pretty humorous boss fight, she tricks MegaMan to thinking Roll hates him.
When I ran into Miss Blondie, she told me all sorts of things. Like how she's glad she doesn't have to go out on digs with you. Do you think that's fair? She gets to relax while you run around getting shot at. Don't you think that's a little strange?
Well,
Wait, there's more. Haven't you ever noticed that she's keeping some of the money you give her for weapons development for herself? She's skimming off the top and you don't even realize it.
what? Skimming?
She makes you all sorts of equipment and weapons, right? Do you really think it costs that much? You really are sick, aren't you?
We are then given access to the ruin that has the first key that we'll need. Throughout exploring this dungeon, we are stopped by this boss named Bola, who like some of this game's cast literally just exists out of nowhere and is quite the anomaly. He's pretty cool, I wish we got to know more about him. We get the first of the 4 keys and we take it back to Von Blecher on board the SS Sulphur Bottom. And that's the general gist of Mega Man Legend. Similar to the first game, you explore 4 different locations finding one of the 4 key items. This time around, each area feels much more distinct, having its own island and citizens to interact with. The side content in particular I really want to talk about here. Similar to the first game, it takes much influence from JRPGs with its own shooter twist. There's this really fun movement option with these skates, allowing you to gain momentum at high speeds. There are even these circuit races that you can take place in. You can return to the post office to see any mail that is sent to you, which is mainly from the server boss talking about how Tron is handling the loss of your fight with her. I brought this up a little earlier, but on board your ship you can restore what was destroyed in the opening fire. There is actually a whole karma system tied to your actions in this game. If you answer in certain ways to questions, kick animals or serve bots, there's this passive ethics system that will keep track of it all. Act uncivil and you'll become Dark Mega Man, or act nicely by donating to the church and helping others and you'll become Light Mega Man. Kinda similar to the world tendency system in Demon Souls or any game with a moral alignment system. How you act will affect how you are treated by certain characters. For instance, Ro will navigate to you during dungeon sections and she'll be much more happier giving you helpful tips if you lean more towards light than if you was to be towards the dark.
Looks like there's an opening you can use to get down to the floor underneath you. Except it's covered by some kind of energy barrier. Maybe you can deactivate the barrier with the control panel.
Also, and I couldn't bring myself to become Dark Mega Man in this playthrough, but if you do, Ro literally reverts back to becoming depressed again. So yeah, Light Mega Man it is. The music in this game is once again amazing, some very colourful and vibrant beats. In particular, my favourite track would have to be the title theme. Something about it is so relaxing, kind of like elevator music. Here's another random piece of side content from this game. Exploring your ship, you can read Ro's diary, which has a lot of interesting lore alongside her impressions on the events of this game's story. One interesting log that I had to bring up is how when they found Volnut and adopted him, Ro decided to name him Mega Man after her favourite game. That would be like calling a kid Superman because you like the films. I just found that funny. He's named MegaMan in literally the nerdiest way possible. Before moving on, one miscellaneous point I'd like to bring up is this game's art style. The polygon count is definitely higher than Legends 1. The colour palette is also a lot darker, maybe to match the more serious nature of the game. Personally, I prefer the bright look of the first game, but the shift in tone makes a lot of sense here. It also shows how the characters have aged a little from the previous game, having them be taller, which is a nice touch. Moving back to the main story after collecting all 4 keys, and it's here where things get a little confusing. Please bear with me here as I attempt to explain this game's story. Also, I'm just going to put the spoiler tag here. Please skip to this timestamp if you would like to avoid plot spoilers as well as the final boss. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to attempt to explain this story as best I can. By the way, are you familiar with a plot dump? A plot dump is when a story needs to get from point A to point B, but does it in an unnatural way that makes it feel rushed. If you ever feel overwhelmed by a sudden plot explanation in a story and can't make heads or tails of things, chances are this is from the effects of a plot dump. They are quite common in JRPGs. Some examples are here on screen. All great games, but it's a common narrative issue that occurs from time to time. Anyway, sorry about that lengthy description, just had to get it out there as this is Legends 2's greatest flaw. Okay, so after getting all 4 keys, Sarah and Geese attempt to steal them by attacking the ship. It's here where this mysterious woman who goes by the name Yuna helps you out with stopping them in this boss fight. You also get help from the bonds here. We then get this random flashback. This happens out of nowhere, by the way. See, Volnok was an amnesiac who left all his memories with Data the Monkey from the first game. It's here where we find out the purpose behind this all. Volnok once served his master, who is the remains of the pure humans before the carbons, who is everyone in Mega Man Legends, began to populate, which explains why some characters like Barrel have robot-like details. Okay, so in simple terms, these aren't humans, these are carbons, a different race with human beings being extinct. Carrying on, the people who predate the carbons, the ancients, lived on Elysium, or the moon of this world. Volnok's master was responsible for creating life for the carbons. The master then dies after bringing life to the carbons due to age and not being able to live on Terra, this game's version of Earth. The reason Mega Man Volnok is so important is because he has the master's DNA code. The master system was designed to stop all life for the carbons after the master's death, but with his DNA code, Volnok is the only one who can stop this by going to the moon or Elysium where this master system is located to stop the purge from happening. What we thought was the motherlode is actually this very master system, which Yuna warned us about in the beginning in Matilda's body after losing hers. A big reason Volnok removed his memories in the beginning was to stop Sarah from finding any of this out. However, now she knows and is trying to put the end of all carbons in motion. So, in summary, Sarah is the bad guy wanting to end the carbons' existence, and Volnok is the only one who can carry the master's will to keep their existence thriving. Once again, sorry for the plot dump, the game had me so confused at this point.
Confused? That's not surprising, I guess. Now, don't try to think about things too hard.
I also just want to make this as simple as possible. This is Yuna, this is Sarah, and this is Matilda. Yuna's consciousness is in Matilda, but she found her own body, which we saw earlier on Forbidden Island. The game never makes this clear enough, but hopefully this explanation helps. I had to look up so many lore explanations for this game, it felt like a Dark Souls deep dive. Anyway, there's more. We make our way to Elysium thanks to Yuna's help. On the moon, we tackle what Elysium has in store for us, exploring this maze that I got stuck on for a while. We also have a boss rush mode in the same vein as the 2D games, which is a nice touch. I like this one jelly boss you have to switch between planes as you wait for him to become vulnerable. With the best equipment we have at the ready, we confront Sarah, who was waiting for us at the Master's library. She explains that she was jealous of Volnok's relationship with the Master and admits her programming has her failed to understand the why to it all, which is why she can't come to terms with it. After a pretty tricky boss fight relying on some well-timed rolls with her multiple lasers, we then get Sarah's final form. This is pretty difficult, you have to be very mindful of her lasers and gravity manipulation here. This is a fun fight overall. It took a good few attempts with the added difficulty, but I enjoyed this game's challenge. And with that, she is defeated. Sarah transfers her consciousness into Yuna's body this time. Let me just update the graph so that this makes sense. Once again, sorry for the confusion, this is not explained at all by the way. Anyway, after I gained her heart from realizing the Master's will, she explains how the system to eliminate all carbons is still set in motion back on Terra, but after losing their means to return to Earth, they are stuck in space.
So what are we going to do, Mega Man? If we can't get back to Terra, then I can't give Roll her mother back.
Is that the only thing you're worried about?
Don't worry, Yuna.
Why?
I know Ro. She'll come looking for us, no matter what happens.
And after hearing all that, we roll credits. Wait a minute, it ends on a cliffhanger? That's right, the supporting cast attempts to get Volnut back by creating a rocket and it's here where the game ends. And that's Mega Man Legends 2. It predates Half-Life 2, with it ended on a cliffhanger that has gone unanswered for 24 years now. Those poor guys have been stuck on the moon for that long. I hope we get to see them again someday. So I'm gonna keep my thoughts on the story brief here. I don't think it's bad at all, it just attempts to say way too much in too little of a time. It has a very similar story to the first Xenoblade, but whilst that game is 50 hours long, this is about 20 hours. I do feel bad for this series though, and going out all ambitious is a better way to go than if it just kept it a safe sequel. I just think for this reason alone that Mega Man Legends 2 is so close to being a perfect sequel. If it just had like an extra 10 hours for the game's runtime, the whiplash of all these new characters and origin stories wouldn't have been as confusing, and they could give time to properly explain everything and give the new characters actual introductions. I do think if you can come to terms with the whole consciousness being switch shenanigans, it isn't too hard to understand, but that's with me explaining it. In the actual game, scenes go by so fast and important moments don't get enough time, so you can't be blamed for being a little confused. It would have also been nice to get more writing from Sarah Yuna. The judge referenced this them, and they seem to have much more importance to the lore for the series than their short screen time would suggest. I'm also just a fan of their designs. Yuna in particular reminds me of a cyborg Hatsune Miku, which is really cool. And that concludes my Mega Man Legends retrospective. I just want to thank everyone who watched this and left feedback. It's all been greatly appreciated and has helped me improve on making content on YouTube, so once again, thank you. But I'm not completely done with the Mega Man series just yet. I would like to place all 3 parts of this series and make it one big upload, with some tweaks here and there. I also have some video ideas for the X series, so please stay tuned for when that happens. I would also like to ask you guys what you think of Mega Man Legends 2. Do you prefer it more or less than the original? Personally, I prefer it over 1. Sure, it has its flaws, but its ambition is very respectable, as well as its gameplay improvements over Legends 1. Did you also know that this game is overpriced online? Capcom seriously needs to port this series onto modern consoles, but I've said that way too many times now. Thanks for watching to the end of this video. Any feedback in the comments would be appreciated. Have a nice rest of your day.